What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, January 27th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. We're going to be a little more judicious in accepting phone calls because we're getting a lot of reader emails. They want more of the news and less of the jibber-jabber. Quick little program note. In our third hour today, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us, as she normally does, talking about a lot of things, and especially she's going to be talking about Tulsi Gabbard and the recent trip to Syria and all the good information she brought back, and not too surprisingly, how the establishment is now attacking her for it. So we're going to be spending a lot of time in hour number 3 about that. So getting on into the news here, it is amazing how petty the corporate media has become in their desire to find anything they can to demonize Donald Trump. Now, Trump got his first official ride on Air Force One as president yesterday, and apparently walked up to the door. And normally presidents will turn around at that point and smile and wave, get their picture taken and everything, and Donald Trump didn't do that. Probably had a lot on his mind. And the corporate media just went ballistic. How dare you not wave to us before you take off? It's like they're rolling around on the tarmac there saying, you don't love us. And Donald Trump is saying, you're right, I don't. I mean, after the way the corporate media treated him during the campaign and since the election, why would the corporate media think Donald Trump has any kind of warm and fuzzy feelings for them? Because the president of CNN threatened to start a Mideast war unless Donald Trump behaved nice? I don't think so. Now, the issue of election fraud is really heating up with Donald Trump's announcement that he's going to have an investigation. And the reaction from the liberals was explosive. The NAACP has come on out saying that if Trump does go through with a major investigation into voter fraud, the NAACP will resist. They will try and block an official investigation. So let's see. Here we are. Middle of last year, we were being assured by the Obama administration and the corporate media that it was absolutely impossible to rig or tamper with any of our elections. And then as we got into November, oh, Russia's tampering with our elections, and today it's don't you dare investigate the election rigging. They're going to start stripping teeth off the gears in their transmission. They're changing stories so fast. Now then, we're already seeing the media trying to come on out with a little bit of counter spin. They've dropped this idea that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever for any kind of illegal voting or anything. And a story coming out of the Washington Times is citing a report saying that, yes, Hillary Clinton did receive 800,000 votes from non-citizens, but hey, she won 2.8 million, so it didn't make any change at all. And this is the same thing we hear from the corporate media anytime election fraud is uncovered. It's a mistake, it's a glitch, it's minor, and it's too small to have changed the official result. That, once again, is a totally unsupportable statement. Because once you find election fraud, you don't know that you found it all. Now, the reality is the numbers are a lot worse than that. Both votefraud.org and truethevote.org have done their own studies of voter registration records, and they came up with numbers of 3 million non-citizens voting. But there's another article that came out in governmentslaves.info, and they're citing a Pew Center study that shows the problem was actually far worse. When you add in the millions of dead voters and voters who were registered in multiple states, various other issues. I mean, there were a lot of fake, illegitimate voter registrations. They come to a number of 25 million. 25 million. Now, that Washington Times article grudgingly acknowledges that Trump may have had a point, that there were a few illegals voting for Hillary, but it's no big deal. It's not worth an investigation. Of course it's worth an investigation, and it's worth correcting the problem. or Donald Trump is going to face the same machinations, the same nefarious, underhanded election rigging in 2020 that he just barely defeated last year. Now, do you remember, again last year, there was this interview with Barack Obama on this issue of voting illegal, and he was asked a question, you know, if I go to vote, you know, am I in danger of the immigration people coming over and pitching me across the border? And Obama just sits there and says, no, if you're voting, you're a citizen, and they're not going to do anything about it. Well, the question was wrong to begin with. If you're an illegal immigrant, you're not supposed to be voting anyway. And a lot of people interpreted this as Obama putting out the message, if you're an illegal immigrant and you vote, nothing will happen to you, so go ahead and do it. By the way, a little feature of Obamacare most people don't realize. When you sign up for Obamacare, there's also a portion of the Obamacare application that's a voter registration ticket. You are registered to vote when you sign up for Obamacare, but you do not have to prove you're a citizen when you sign up for Obamacare, and nobody was checking. Obamacare registered 12.7 million people just this last year. We don't know how many of them are legal citizens. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. But the situation is completely out of control. All right, we're going to grab a couple of really quick, really fast phone calls. James in South Carolina, what's on your mind?
I had an esoteric question that even the great Michael might not be able to answer, but I want to ask it. I was listening to Alex Jones, and he said that Donald Trump had known about the New World Order since he was a kid. Okay, I have seen it mentioned obliquely before that he had been associated with people who knew about it. Okay, my question is this. I never heard anything about the New World Order ever associated with Joe McCarthy. It was always communism, communism, communism. All right. When Donald Trump was a young person, he was introduced all around New York by Roy Cohn.
Yes.
Now, I guess my question is, and you never heard about that much about it, but was Roy Cohn and Joe McCarthy, did they know about the New World Order? And it has never been spoken of?
Well, the New World Order, as a phrase, really began back with George Herbert Walker Bush, who used that phrase in a speech. But that was after the time of Joe McCarthy and Roy Cohn doing what they did. Certainly, globalism has been around for a long time, and they may have known about it. But I think at this point, looking at how George Soros and the other globalists are just continuing to go after Donald Trump, I don't think there's any question that Donald Trump is going along with their agenda. Quite the contrary. His very slogan, "Make America Great Again," is a call for national sovereignty and nationalism as opposed to globalism.
Well, do you think Roy Cohn was opposed? I mean, that's what I would think. I would think he knew about it and was opposing the so-called New World Order or whatever it was.
I don't think Roy was thinking that far ahead. I mean, Donald Trump was the son of a wealthy father and was just being introduced around as the young people of what could potentially be dynastic families tend to get introduced around, and to make sure that they're part of the correct society. Anyway, James, we're going to let you go and switch over to Bill in Wisconsin. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. Yesterday, you made a little bit of a flub. You said about this demonstration that was going to occur in Washington today as being anti-Trump, and that isn't the case.
No, you're right. I did err on that one. It's pro-life. There's an anti-Trump demonstration going on in Philadelphia.
Yeah, this is the National March for Life. This is against abortion, the killing of the unborn children. The Vice President spoke there today. The first time either a president or a vice president addressed this congregation of good people in 44 years. Also, Kellyanne Conway spoke too, and I had grandchildren there today. So, right on. The other thing, as far as Trump is concerned about torture, he was for it. Then he backed off. Now he's back for it. He said someone told him that it works. And I would bet you any amount of money that it was Bibi that told him it works.
Well, we need to be very careful on that because we're dealing with a corporate media that is still trying to invent news about Donald Trump. Yes, early in his campaign he was saying, yeah, let's go on out and torture the terrorists. Then he backed off because he was told by intelligence professionals that contrary to what you see in movies and TV shows, torture does not actually produce actionable intelligence. It can produce politically expedient confessions. That's why they waterboarded Khalid Sheikh Mohammed 100 and some odd times to get him to confess to 9/11. But it doesn't actually provide you information. And so Trump backed off at that point. Now, all of the current talk about Trump being in favor of torture again goes back to a report that appeared in the Washington Compost and the New York Slimes about a draft executive order that was going to reopen the CIA's black sites around the world. But the White House is saying it's not a White House document. Somebody just made this up and threw it out there, and the corporate media grabbed onto it without checking its provenance.
Okay, all right, that's all I have. Short call, and let's go. Let's stand up for life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. And let's see, another phone call. Then we're going to close the lines for a while because I got a bunch of news. Laura in Colorado, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to encourage everyone to write snail mail letters to Donald Trump. I was listening to DV Kid recently talk about how many hundreds of thousands of emails go through, but not very many people are actually writing paper letters. And I think would be highly effective for people to send letters through the snail mail to the White House. There are a lot of issues that, you know, it almost looks like Trump is flip-flopping on some things, and we want to be able to let him know how we feel. And I think that a lot of mail going up there is probably the right answer.
Well, the emails get scanned by computers to pull out keywords and try and build a statistical base of what people are concerned about. Natural language, grammatical processing has become quite advanced on that. But you're right, a paper letter does get opened. So sending a paper letter is probably going to be more effective, but I have to have the caveat. Don't send a snail mail letter to the White House just to send a snail mail letter to the White House. Have something meaningful to contribute. Don't just say, hi, how are you? We're having fun. Send me, send me a White House coaster or something like that.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Recently an article was published in which one of our state representatives up in Colorado, up in Denver, she's a Latino and she is a Democrat, obviously, and she, wrote a letter to Donald Trump stating, please don't deport the illegal aliens. And of course, there's 30,000 of them or so. That's the number that we've been given. 30,000 of these illegal aliens living in Colorado, and it's like, you know what, we want them out of here. A lot of people consider when you break the law, you break the law.
Yeah, that's it.
If you're a criminal, you're a criminal. You got to go. You know?
Absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm still getting all these emails saying, "Oh, you're a racist if you don't allow the illegal immigrants to come on in." And my reply back to them is, illegal is not a race. It is a condition, and but they're still out there screaming, and it really, really is heating up. Anyway, listen, Laura, going to let you go. Got a lot of news we've got to cover here today, and we're going to close the phone lines for a while until I get some more of these stories done here, so that we can strike a balance here between news and commentary. Now then, getting on over to the corporate media, which seems to be on the verge of committing harakiri in full view of the American public. Keith Olbermann, who I used to have a lot of respect for, he's now on his show out there saying President Trump should resign. President Trump is not of sound mind. And apparently Keith Olbermann is suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. And apparently he's just ranting and raving on his own YouTube channel now. Just out there with this nonsense. Rachel Maddow, another one I used to have a lot of respect for, is now using her show on MSNBC to attack the idea of third parties. How dare you not accept that this is a Republican and Democratic nation? So she's attacking the very political system this nation was started with, because this nation was not started as a two-party system. The two-party system was created to save corporations lots of money. Instead of having to donate to 5 or 6 candidates to bypass the will of the voters, you only have to donate to 2. The two-party system is simply to save costs for the corrupting influences in Washington, D.C. Now, Tim Pool used to be a journalist over at Vice News Network, which is a Rupert Murdoch-owned company. And in a recent interview just opened up very honestly that Vice News was not about reporting any kind of news, that they were literally instructed by management to, quote, play to the audience, end quote, meaning feed the liberals what the liberals want to hear, what they want to read, what they want to see. Edward R. Murrow's got to be spinning in his grave over that one. Now, apparently CNN is out with another easily discredited claim. CNN is claiming President Trump's job approval rating is at 36%. This just days after a couple of other polls showed that support for his approval is above 50%, and it's still going up. Now, the BBC, the network that reported on the collapse of World Trade Center 7, Building Number 7, 26 minutes before it actually happened, came out with a documentary, The Kremlin Candidate, about how Donald Trump was an agent of Vladimir Putin. He was a Russian. He was going to rule the United States for the benefit of Russia. And everybody knows that the United States has to be ruled for the benefit of Israel. And so Russian media have gone after this BBC mockumentary, if you will, with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor, and basically laying out the career resumes of the people at BBC who did this documentary, and it is not pleasant reading to find out that these individuals are just career deceivers, just like the American corporate media here. So over at Investment Watch blog, they've got an article saying the same thing, how the corporate media is committing mass career suicide because everything that they do only damages their own credibility more. And at the point where their financial backers finally understand that corporate media is no longer able to steer the minds of the American people, those multi-million-dollar paychecks are going to disappear. Now, believe it or not, the corporate media is still out there trying to raise on a busted flush, and in particular that photo that was put on out showing that there was no crowd at Donald Trump's inauguration. And the first thing that you need to notice is that that photo, which apparently was taken hours before the inauguration, you look up on the Capitol building, on the platform, there's nobody there. It's just chairs. And, of course, CNN put out their gigapixel image, which shows how big the crowd really was. You'd think the corporate media would understand they need to sort of retire from the field with as much dignity and honor as they can. But they're still out there saying, no, we have the truth. Everybody else is lying. We're telling you the truth. And methinks the corporate media doth protest way too much. And I would almost think somebody somewhere has to be saying, how is our audience reacting to this behavior? Is it positive for our image or negative? Because it doesn't come across to me as being very positive at all. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back with more news. All right, I'm going to keep talking here because we seem to have a little bit of a goof with our programming system. All right, so getting on back to what that individual said, the DC's March for Life, highlighting gains by abortion opponents. And certainly that epic public relations disaster with Planned Parenthood has not helped their cause. And Chili's restaurants had actually announced they were going to have a fundraiser for Planned Parenthood. If you eat at Chili's, so much percentage of your check would go to Planned Parenthood, at which point Claire and I decided we were not going to eat at Chili's anymore. And Chili's has now canceled that plan because apparently they heard a lot of complaints from a lot of people about what Planned Parenthood has been doing. I mean, they're under criminal investigation right now for the buying and selling of baby parts. Now, getting on back to that women's march, which got a little weird. There was this video of this one lady with a ghoul makeup on, and she had a baby doll on a red yarn supposed to represent an umbilical, just bashing it into the cement over and over and over again. Pornhub, which is one of the largest distributors of streaming online porn, reports that during the Women's March, a large part of their female audience went away. And that may give you something about the character of the people who were taking part in this march, as does the following story, because one of the speakers at the march, and we're not talking about Bandana with the F word and all the rest of that, one of the speakers at the march, Donna Hilton, is a convicted felon. And she was convicted for taking part in the kidnapping, torturing, sodomizing, and murder of an old man. This is what's being held up as a hero for the women's movement. Now, apparently this Hilton, and it's spelled H-Y-L-T-O-N, so you don't confuse it with the family that owns the hotels or with Paris. Hilton was part of a gang of 7 people who kidnapped this real estate broker and held him for ransom and then ultimately killed him. And this is held up as an icon of women's liberation. You can't get away with this sort of thing in the age of the Internet. Oh, and by the way, that girl who set the Trump supporters' hair on fire, they've identified her on the Internet as well. So over at the New York Slimes, every once in a while, they will make an apology. And apparently, a day after the Women's March, the Times ran a story about how the men of Montclair, New Jersey were having trouble coping with housework and childcare because the women were away protesting. Basically, it's a 1950s sitcom, reported as news. And they got ridiculed for it on social media. And the New York Times editor said, okay, yeah, it was a bad idea right from the start. And it was. If you're a news organization, you report the news. If you want to be in entertainment and fantasy, go out to Hollywood or open an amusement park. Like I said, Edward R. Murrow would be spinning in his grave to see what corporate news media has become in his absence. Now, as I mentioned, apparently there are anti-Trump protesters in the streets of Pennsylvania, coincident with Donald Trump attending the GOP policy retreat. This actually happened yesterday. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it was a crowd out there. They're still trying. There's this appears to be this concerted effort to delegitimize Donald Trump. And it's really not working very well. And the only thing I can think of is that there really is a plan to somehow take Donald Trump out of office. And they're trying to brainwash the American people into thinking, well, maybe, okay, it was a good idea. Because I'm pretty much sure that they understand that if they take out Donald Trump and the American people don't think that's a good idea, they could trigger a civil war. I don't want to see that happen. You don't want to see that happen. But at the same time, Donald Trump won the election by the rules everybody agreed to play by. He is the president. It's time to deal with that. Now, getting on over to the war zones, apparently ISIS was trying an attack to retake Aleppo, and the Syrian army was able to repel it, drive them back, and they're now regrouping and adding reinforcements to launch a counteroffensive. So this situation in Syria is winding down. It's only a matter of time. And with Tulsi Gabbard out there just calling attention to the fact that the U.S. has been covertly supporting these people, they can't maintain the fraud any longer. I mean, technically, when President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were sending weapons and ammunition and other supplies to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, they were technically committing an act of treason. because treason is defined as aid and comfort to an enemy in times of war. Well, we have been propagandized for decades that there's an ongoing global war on terror and that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are our enemies. So you can see what a public relations nightmare this is getting to be. And I think those who are still trying to get into Syria are doing so out of either ego, I'm never wrong, I may not be right, but I'm never wrong, or those people who understand that if the U.S. fails to carry out that plan to shackle all the Middle East oil nations to the U.S. dollar, as Wesley Clark blew the whistle on back in 2005, that the U.S. economy is in serious, serious trouble. Because that petrodollar is the only thing that is keeping the U.S. dollar as a viable global currency. Our manufacturing has declined. Nobody wants our overpriced, poor quality products, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. Now, Rob Kirby is now out there speculating that Donald Trump has the authority to order a gold audit of all the gold held by the United States government, presumably in Fort Knox and at the New York Federal Reserve. If that happens, of course, you can expect the price of gold to explode. Because as we talked about on that History Channel show, The Book of Secrets, there isn't really as much gold there as they want you to believe. And then there's that other scandal that erupted in Germany where some of the gold bars floating around with the hallmarks of the Federal Reserve and Fort Knox and the U.S. government have tungsten cores to them. It's like the James Bond movie Goldfinger. Somebody really did rob Fort Knox. They didn't have to use a nuclear weapon to do it here. Now, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are set for a phone call tomorrow. And based on the results of that phone call, Donald Trump is signaling he's considering lifting the Russian sanctions. They really have not harmed Russia all that much. They've harmed Europe a lot more. It really is time for them to come to an end. And I'll give you another reason why we have to pull back on all this sanction thing. The sanctions only work because all of the world's economy are going through a couple of key choke points. And that's what gives sanctions their teeth. Too many sanctions, people are going to stop using those choke points. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, the corporate media is out there trying to sell everybody on the idea that the economy is doing really, really great. The stock market is up and unemployment's only 5%. We know that that number is an absolute fraud. We've got over 90 million legal American citizens willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. Then we found out that the inflation numbers are being rigged as well. One of the numbers that is still more or less honest is the gross domestic product. And looking at that number, it is obvious our economy is not healthy at all. But the reason the corporate media is trying to claim the economy was wonderful through the end of the Obama administration is to blame the coming downturn on Donald Trump. The same way they blamed the 1930s depression on President Herbert Hoover. But Herbert Hoover did not create that depression. It was created for him by many of the same people who are monkeying around with our economy today. Let's see. Google's phone costs are dragging down Google's profits. It's not a hot seller. Same is true for Apple. Apparently, they're unable to stimulate sales for their newest model. Buyers still prefer last year's model. And that business model that they've had in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when the economy really was good, the tech boom was out there and people were making money, and you could go along with this idea that you're going to buy a newer version of everything every 4 to 5 years. That was actually a viable business model. New computer every 5 years, new cell phone every 5, so forth, so on. You can't do that anymore. When the people have lost their jobs, when the jobs have been offshored or automated, and people don't have money, they're certainly not going to buy a replacement for something that's still working. You know, I love my iPhone 5. And as long as it's working, I don't see a compelling reason to spend money on an upgrade. It does everything I need it to do. And there's nothing being advertised about the new phones that makes me say, oh, I just got to have that. Anyway, it's like when car makers stopped improving the cars and decided just adding more chrome would make people want to buy the new one, or the fins on the back. You have to be my age to remember that whole situation. Now, Ellen Brown has a wonderful article out there, How to Cut Infrastructure Costs in Half. And this is directed at the estimated cost of Donald Trump's plan to start rebuilding America's infrastructure, which it is in sore need of right now. But one of the reasons for the sticker shock is when you consider that because our economy is not very good, and the government actually doesn't have any kind of a budget surplus, quite the contrary, in order to launch these infrastructure projects, the U.S. government's going to have to borrow the money from the Federal Reserve at interest. And Ellen Brown is saying that if you calculate out over the period of repayment of those loans, the cost of the interest is actually more than the cost of the infrastructure itself. And we could, like, cut that infrastructure investment in half if we were to finance it through publicly owned banks, like the one that's operating in North Dakota. We have to free ourselves, our nation, from being debt slaves to pieces of ink and paper loaned into circulation at interest. And at some point, I think Donald Trump is going to have to confront that reality, that the reason our economy is such a mess, the reason the economies of the entire world are such a mess, goes back to that 11th marble logic. Because private central banks, by design, manufacture more debt than money with which to pay that debt. So the debt grows and grows faster than the money supply. And it doesn't matter how hard you work and how much you sacrifice, you can never get out of that debt obligation. It is a system of enslavement to control you through that awareness of a debt obligation to those bankers. It's rule by compound interest. And it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works as long as you allow yourself to be brainwashed that this is the way life is supposed to be. And it isn't, because this nation was started with an entirely different economic system that worked for the nation and for the people. And the private central bankers hate that. The private central bankers can't stand anybody or any nation operating without being indebted to them. Ellen Brown's done a lot of good work. I'm going to try and get her on the show here in the very, very near future. Now, as you know, the stock market was soaring in the last few weeks of Obama's term in office. It was certainly soaring before the election, trying to make the incumbents look good. It's been soaring since the election on the enthusiasm that Trump is going to be very, very business-friendly. But a lot of people, up until Trump's election, have been asking, who is it who's buying all these stocks in an obviously overvalued stock market? And so there's a story coming out of Investment Watch blog that says the Federal Reserve itself, through a proxy called Citadel Capital, has been buying stocks in order to keep the stock market up, so that the stock market numbers can be used as a political banner to wave at you. See, the stock market's great, the economy's fine. If you're starving and you don't have a job and you've lost your home and everything, it has to be your fault. It's nothing the government or the bankers did. See, the stock market's doing great. Remember when Bill Clinton was in office? It was all, it's the economy, stupid. We're doing really good. I got a federal budget surplus. And he made that federal budget surplus by looting the Social Security Trust Fund. He embezzled the money of American workers and spent it as general revenues. and that Social Security Trust Fund is now full of IOUs the federal government cannot honor. And that's why they're talking about a Social Security crisis and raising the retirement age and cutting benefits or increasing Social Security taxes so you have to pay for it all over again. And if you trust this government with your money again, what's going to happen? Now, they'll grab it and spend it on something else. Now, one of the families, in fact, the majority owner of all the world's private central banks is, of course, the Rothschild family. And we've been hearing in the news recently about how the world's top 8 billionaires have more wealth than the bottom half of all of mankind. And the Rothschild family wealth is actually 5 times that of the world's top 8 billionaires combined. But they're never mentioned in the press. They don't want people to know about them, for the same exact reason that the Federal Reserve is fighting a full audit, tooth and nail. The last thing they need is for people to find out just how much real wealth has been taken from the pockets of the people and put into the pockets of the private central bankers, all for the privilege of using their particular brand of paper and ink. It would be a stunning, stunning number. So let's talk about immigration, refugee crisis. It's a hot topic here today. The German population has hit an all-time record high of 82.8 million due to the migrant surge. And that has not been a positive experience for Germany, both because of the civil unrest it's caused, the high crime rate that has come in with it, but because most of those refugees are unable to find work, and they are now burdens on the German taxpayer, who are already suffering a burden having to prop up the rest of the European Union. So they're getting very, very unhappy with their government. There is now open talk of a Gexit, of going sovereign. And Merkel's people are out there saying, oh no, this is all evil propaganda from the evil Russians. We're doing great. It's those Russians who are telling you we're doing bad things. Nobody's telling anybody. The German people can open their own eyes and see what is happening to their country. And that's always the best idea. Forget about these little electronic matrix windows in front of you. Go on out into your own town and community and just look with your own eyes. Try and imagine you're a tourist visiting your town for the first time, with open eyes seeing everything fresh. Look at the cracks in the pavement, the rust and corrosion on all the fixtures, the number of homeless people living in the streets, the number of retail vacancies. That'll tell you what's really going on in this country. Now, up in Switzerland, which has a reputation for passing really, really bizarre laws, supporting the refugees over and above their own population, there's a new scandal up there because the Swiss media are out there selling this idea that these refugees have to be led into Switzerland because it's too dangerous for them to live in their home countries. Yet according to reports coming out in the Swiss media today, thousands of those refugees go back to their home nations every year on a vacation. Got to go visit the family and everything. If it's that dangerous, why are they going back? And even worse, they're using the social welfare funds they get from the Swiss taxpayers. Now, remember something I mentioned a while back. The process of migration is a filter. You are not getting a representative cross-sample of the people in that country of origin. You're not getting the best people. What you're getting are those who can't make it in their home country, those who are fleeing prosecution. So, story coming out of Information Liberation, Trump's executive order could allow for the deportation of all illegal aliens. Why should that be a problem? And again, there is a legal path to citizenship here in the United States of America. And for those who have gone through that, welcome, I hope it is not a disappointment now that you're here. I don't think anybody has a problem with legal immigrants who integrate to our society, become a benefit to our culture and our economy. It's the illegals. And illegal is not a race. Now then, if you're that concerned about all of these migrants flooding into Europe from the war-ravaged areas of the Middle East, isn't the most logical thing to do to stop all these U.S.-sponsored wars in those Middle Eastern countries that made them refugees in the first place, and let them go home and start to rebuild their lives in peace and safety? Now, here in the United States of America, Miami has become the first city to break ranks with the sanctuary group, and they are now accepting Donald Trump's demands that the local police authorities will in fact cooperate with immigration officials. And this may encourage other cities to start to go along with it. Not all of them. Apparently over in Brownsville, Texas, there's an abandoned Walmart store that's been taken over by a nonprofit organization called Southwest Key. And Southwest Key receives the majority of its funding from your tax dollars via the Office of Refugees Resettlement that was started up under the Obama administration. And they're turning this abandoned Walmart into a shelter for illegal immigrants. Now then, one more time for the slow people. Title 8, United States Code, Section 1324, defines several distinct offenses related to illegal aliens. One subsection prohibits alien smuggling, domestic transportation of unauthorized aliens, concealing or harboring unauthorized aliens, encouraging or inducing unauthorized aliens to enter the United States, and engaging in a conspiracy or aiding and abetting any of those preceding crimes. The basic statutory maximum penalty for violating Title 8, Section 1324, is imprisonment for not more than 10 years and a substantial fine. If you harbor an illegal immigrant who goes on out and commits a murder, you yourself can be tried for accessory to murder, and you can be sentenced to whatever number of years in prison the courts deem appropriate. All of these groups and organizations that are trying to hide and conceal the illegal immigrants are in violation of Title 8. That's what I was saying yesterday on the radio show. Trump really doesn't need to build a wall. All he has to do is enforce the existing laws against providing shelter or employment to illegal immigrants and cut off the financial incentive for them to come here. And they'll stop coming here. And for all those people who are out there screaming, the liberal crybabies who are out there screaming about Donald Trump's immigration policy is racist and so forth, I would like to refer you back to Bill Clinton's State of the Union speech from 1995, in which he says virtually the same things Donald Trump is saying today. That illegal immigration is a problem. It is displacing American workers. It is putting a burden on the American taxpayers. Now, Mexico, at least up until a short while ago, looked ready to start a trade war against the United States. They launched a social media campaign against U.S. products in retaliation for Donald Trump's threat of imposing a 20% tariff on Mexican products imported into the United States of America to finance the wall. Of course, Mexico wouldn't pay that tariff. The American customers of those Mexican products would pay that tariff. And that would discourage them from buying those Mexican imported products, like Dos Equis and Tecate and so forth. But the trade war may have been cut off or about to be cut off, and I'll give you the clarification. A little bit of breaking news when we come on back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And there was breaking news just when we went to air at the beginning of the show here, where apparently Donald Trump and the President of Mexico had an hour-long phone call. And supposedly a transcript will be released later today. But if there's one thing that we know Donald Trump is good at, it's making deals. And so there may be a resolution to this. And it may be that Donald Trump will cancel building the wall if Mexico will enforce their own borders from their side. But again, we don't really need a wall. It's cheaper to put crocodiles in the Rio Grande. But on a more serious note, if we cut off the financial incentive to sneak across our border, the problem will go away. If you really want to be fair and just, let us have an immigration policy that is the mirror image of the one in Mexico. You can't just step over that border, get a job, get free stuff, go wherever you want. You step over the border into Mexico without the permission of the Mexican government, you are going to jail for a long time. Now, Reuters is reporting that the largest 10 sanctuary cities who are refusing to go along with the change in immigration policy, who are refusing to cooperate with federal immigration authorities, could lose a combined total of $2.2 billion with a B dollars in federal funding. And understanding the dynamics and economics of being a sanctuary city and supporting that population, that's a big hit. These cities don't have that money to lose. Now, out in California, they're making serious steps towards secession. They're calling it the Cal Exit, and they've reached the point where now supporters of secession for California can begin collecting signatures to qualify for the 2018 ballot. Now, obviously, this is fraught with a little bit of peril, because the last time states tried to secede from the United States, a war resulted. And I can't imagine all those gun-fearing, easily offended people in California could win a war of independence. Of course, if other states started to split off at the same time, that would be a different story. And as you're probably already aware, there are secession movements in Texas based on the fact that even the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the manner by which the U.S. Congress annexed Texas was illegal. There have been secession movements in California, Washington, Oregon. There's one in Alaska. We've got a couple of them out here in Hawaii. We're trying to get Leon Siu, the Foreign Affairs Secretary for the Kingdom of Hawaii, to come on our show again. It could all start falling apart, especially if there is an economic crash. All right, we're going to take a break for our top-of-the-hour station identification. Back with hour number 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, hour number 2. And Donald Trump at that GOP policy forum was talking about what's going on up in Chicago. It's out-of-control violence there. Chicago is held up as the model of gun control for all America by the gun grabbers. And of course, they've got this insane murder rate up there. We were reporting yesterday there was a memorial for a victim of gang-related gun violence that was itself a target of gang-related gun violence. 6 people shot, one of them a 12-year-old girl. And so Trump was asking what the heck's going on up in Chicago, and then he answers his own question by saying Democrats, which everybody yucks up to. But history has definitely shown the more you take guns away from law-abiding citizens, the more criminals will run rampant across society because they know nobody's going to be able to defend themselves. Nobody's going to be able to shoot back. One of the worst ideas the gun grabbers came up with were those gun-free zone signs. It was like an invitation to any wacko with his brain melted on prescription antidepressants. Come on in and have fun. Nobody's going to be able to shoot back at you. I think those signs should all be taken down and replaced with one that says, warning, 1/3 of the people here are carrying concealed. You guess which ones. And I'll bet you all of this mass shooting craziness would start to go away the very next day. All right, let's go ahead and grab a couple of phone calls. Mark in Georgia, aloha, what's on your mind?
Hey, good evening, sir. I was calling because I saw Vicente Fox on CNN last night, and every time I see him, I can't help but to think of back when Bush was in the Security Prosperity Partnership, which was part of the North American Union. And the only thing I can think of is one of the reasons they may be fighting so hard is because, remember, they wanted to pass the Texas Trans Corridors, was going to be the pathway to import a lot of the products, Chinese goods and stuff from Mexico.
It was also going to be the pathway to import a lot of drugs because that corridor was supposed to be treated like an international zone where there weren't going to be a lot of customs inspections.
Is that a done deal? I don't hear much about it anymore.
No, it fell apart. It fell apart because the whole reason for the North American Union, see, the plan of the globalists was very simple. We're going to form this European Union, and all will be well. And then we'll form the North American Union, and all will be well. And then we'll form another union over here, and then when we get to the point where all the world is just 8 unions, we'll merge them all together and declare our global government. Unfortunately, that plan has hit a major pothole in the road. The European Union is in meltdown for 2 reasons. First of all, because it was created with a built-in self-destruct device called the European Central Bank. And second, because the open borders policy being pushed by the globalists, and in particular George Soros, have resulted in a furious backlash of nationalism from all these European nations who are feeling literally invaded by all these very problematic, troublesome refugees coming in from areas that were where wars have been started. And so the North American Union, the enthusiasm has never been there because analysts understand that for the North American Union to work, okay, that the United States and Canada have to be brought down to the same level as Mexico, or there would be a wild panic once the borders started coming down. And a lot of people said, I don't, after all that we have worked to build the economies of the United States and Canada, which have been under attack, obviously, in recent years, but we don't want to just give it up and go back to living third world status, because that's the one failure of the New World Order globalist plans. They can't bring the bottom up to match the top. It's too expensive. It's much cheaper and easier, they thought, to drag the top down and make us all a single-level third-world planet, underneath the golden throne.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Doing okay.
Would you talk about California?
Yes.
I think what you would have, if they would, is you have very similar to what's going on with the Ukraine now. In the eastern Ukraine and the Crimea, of course, they wanted to go with Russia.
Yeah.
They didn't want to have any part of that of the western Ukraine.
Yes.
And I think that would happen in California, where central and western California say, oh, no, you don't, because a lot of them want to separate from California right now and become their own state of Jefferson.
That's the Northern California part, yeah, and that could happen as well. I mean, they could split off and balkanize. But again, if California secedes by itself, it's probably going to prompt a military action from Washington, D.C., even though it was acknowledged even prior to the first Civil War that states do have a legal right to leave the Union. But if all of these secession movements in all of the American states that are active right now were to happen at the same time, Washington, D.C. would simply not have the resources to take them all on.
Well, this is what my own opinion is this. If that happened, I think the United States should just say, okay, fine. You can have a certain amount of the coast, including cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, I don't know about it, but we're going to keep harbor areas, important harbor areas along the coast, such as San Diego and parts of San Francisco, parts of the Bay Area for, military purposes. And you
I'm sure the new nation of California would be perfectly happy to lease them those spaces. I mean, normally that is how the United States has military bases in foreign countries. They're leasing the property. And, of course, here in Hawaii, before we were annexed by the United States government, the sugar plantation owners literally traded Pearl Harbor to the U.S. government in order to encourage the annexation.
But at no way are they going, would I tell them, no way are you going to get central and eastern part of California or northern, north central, any other part of the interior part of California. It just ain't going to happen. All right, that'll stay part of the United States. They want to be part of the United States, and that's the way it's going to be. I think
well, there's one other factor you need to keep in mind, and that is that Donald Trump. And first of all, I do want to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. The one area where Donald Trump is not likely to succeed is in turning the economy around and avoiding this crash that has been building for years and years and years and years. And if that happens, you might see a large number of the United States decide they're better off on their own rather than getting dragged down with that central government. And like lifeboats on an ocean liner, they may cut themselves free and sort of drift off and look after themselves.
Well, I kind of thought that had the Wicked Witch been elected, had more of a chance of a civil war at that point and a secession, especially since I think she would have started coming after the guns, and I think that would have really triggered off civil war. Yes. It wouldn't have gotten good for the government either, because the war would have been triggered off with people who know how to use guns.
Yes.
And like you said, the snowflakes or the precious flowers or whatever you want to call them out, the coastal areas of California, Oregon, Washington, and New York, Massachusetts, and places like that. Okay, so
well, let's be fair to the states of Oregon and Washington. They have a healthy gun culture, and Claire and I briefly lived in Washington State, and yeah, you're not finding a lot of gun grabbing going on there, at least not when we lived there.
No, they don't dare at this point, but watch it. But they may start as more and more Californians move in there, and again, it's the coastal area they've got to be careful with, but that's where so much of the population tends to accumulate. I'm talking about even Washington and Oregon, and they're the ones who come to have ideas that really don't go with the traditions of the West. They just don't.
Okay, well, listen, yeah, I understand that, and but we're again, if California tries to do this all by themselves, it's not going to work out. Look, I mean, for one thing, the U.S. government may come in and simply rig the election. Look at how the government of Britain is trying to reverse the Brexit vote. How they tried to reverse the Crimean referendums. The people in power like things just exactly the way they are. But again, if there is a crash in the economy that takes Washington, D.C. down with it, we could easily see the United States balkanize. We could see Hawaii and Alaska go back to being individual nations. There was talk some years ago about the Western States Coalition that was going to break off if the U.S. federal debt topped $6 trillion. Of course, now we're up to 20. And we could see the continental United States break into three parts, which would be the states west of the Mississippi, the original Northeast elite area, and the Confederacy along those lines could break apart as well. Anyway, listen, we're going to let you. Okay, we're going to let you go here, and we're going to talk to Mark in Western New York. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. First-time caller, long-time listener. I was listening to you back when you were on with Jeff's network. I just wanted to throw out a couple things here. First of all, it's the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 1 fire, as you're probably well aware of.
Yes.
And I guess it was like 6:31 p.m. when it happened. But surely, after 50 years, they have not been forgotten. Anyways, what I wanted to ask or mention was some observations regarding taxing online purchases.
Well, before we go into the taxing online purchases, I want to go back to the Apollo fire because one of the astronauts who died in it, of course, was Gus Grissom. And there was this rather tragic irony because of what happened with Grissom and Freedom 7, where they lost, I'm sorry, Liberty Bell 7, where they lost the capsule.
Liberty Bell 7.
Right, Liberty Bell 7, and Grissom insisted that the safety bolts on the hatch had just blown on impact with the ocean. It was an issue that was never resolved, although when they recovered Liberty Bell 7, they did not recover the hatch. So that was not, could not be determined at that time. Now, Gemini was already in the planning stages when Liberty Bell 7 went down, so they kept their ejection seats and exploding hatches. But they literally, because of Gus Grissom insisting that the hatch had just blown on Liberty Bell 7, they designed the original Apollo spacecraft not to have an emergency escape system on that door. And that's the reason they couldn't get out of the Apollo 1 fire. And obviously, when the Block 2 Apollos came out, they did have a quick release on that hatch.
Apparently, they perished in like 15 seconds.
It was a pure oxygen fire, and the Russian Space Agency had one a few years before, but they'd hushed it up. Otherwise, probably there would have been a lot more concern about a pure oxygen environment, especially with all that Velcro all over the place.
I guess they were asphyxiated before they even succumbed to any of the burns that the bodies indicated.
I don't even really care to speculate exactly how they died. It had to be horrific. As brief as it was still a horrible way to go.
Well documented in the Tom Hanks From the Earth to the Moon.
Yes, it is.
Old miniseries.
I love that. I got the DVDs on that. I watch that thing and I wallow in nostalgia for the good old days.
Absolutely. I was sorry to hear that Eugene Cernan passed recently.
Well, we're all getting older, you know, and that's where it is. All right, we're running out of time. You wanted to talk about taxing on online sales.
Regarding the fuss over online sales hurting brick-and-mortar stores and the issue where the government says they cannot tax those sales, for many years throughout the 20th century, we shopped from home. We had catalogs.
Yes.
Anything that's listed today. Many people in their businesses use catalog purchasing as a way to get.
That's how Sears began. Sears didn't begin as a brick-and-mortar retail outlet. They began as a catalog operation. They had a huge catalog. It was like a big event when this year's catalog showed up. And then you'd put last year's catalog out in the outhouse. And yeah, it was all shop, and it would be, if you've seen The Music Man, that song, the Wells Fargo wagon is coming down the street, that's how you got your products here. When there wasn't a mobility. But I think if you're going to have sales tax on items sold in the brick-and-mortar stores, I think it's perfectly justifiable to have sales tax on products that are ordered online. In fact, I think I would be in favor of scrapping the income tax entirely and having nothing but sales tax so that the tax burden falls on those who've got the money to be buying more items.
Well, you're going against the status quo of what was the norm for these catalog sales. Anything purchased out of state would come through just with a shipping charge.
Well, maybe they were well, first of all, going up against the status quo has kind of become a lifestyle for me. There may have been taxes on the shipping charge, for all we know. And it's not like tax policy represents any kind of an exercise in logic. It's simply coming up with an excuse to take money from the public that the public will be agreeable to.
Taking it away from a record number of jobless, non-tax-paying citizens, or Americans, let's put it that way.
All right. Well, listen, thank you for the reminder about the Apollo 1 fire, and we're going to let you go because we're really short on time today. We're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hi.
Oh, speaking of Sears catalogs, wow.
Yes.
That brings back memories like Bambergers and Sears. Hey, Mike, yeah, I want to go back to your, with the Federal Reserve buying
Oh, wait a minute. Before
Yeah.
we go on that, I just had a flashback memory from the little church I went to in Loudon, New Hampshire. The minister gave a sermon warning parents not to let their kids look at that Sears catalog because of the ladies' undergarment ads were illustrated.
I always used to look at that, and the video games.
Yes. Well, you're a lot younger than I am. They didn't have video game consoles when I was a kid looking at the lingerie ads in the Sears catalog.
But they still look good. Hey, Mike. Yeah, on Federal Reserve, that's the last stage when the Federal Reserve's got to purchase the debt. I mean, you're looking at a Rome welfare warfare state. That's part of the reason why they're letting in the refugees, put them on assistance and get them hooked on debt for the banks. I mean,
yeah, but there's a flaw there. If these people cannot be given jobs with which to repay that debt, it's merely accelerating the decline. And by the way, the story I reported earlier in the show, the Federal Reserve may be buying up treasuries. It would make sense for them to try and do so. But the issue is they're also buying up stocks to prop up that stock market. The Federal Reserve appears to have become part of the plunge protection team that's been crushing the shorts.
Exactly.
If anybody else other than the plunge protection team were playing those kinds of manipulation games, they'd be going to jail.
That's all the tools they got left. You know, this is the last stage, man. I mean, Trump's not going to be able to fix this. I mean, I voted for Trump. I'm a Democrat. I voted for Obama, unfortunately. But Trump's not going to be able to fix. I think we're at a time. The Western world is at a time with too much debt, too many wars, too much lies and corruption and greed. This is what killed Rome.
Yes.
The Western world is a Roman, Anglo-Saxon, Marxist, neoliberal empire. That's
now,
what we are. We need to realize this.
Donald Trump is enough of a maverick that before the actual collapse, he may take the draconian steps of taking direct control of the Federal Reserve, the way Vladimir Putin took control of Russia's private central bank. In order to manage the public currency as a public utility, Trump could even nationalize the Federal Reserve completely. Remember, Congress still has the authority to repeal the charter for the Federal Reserve. And all they have to do is repay the $1 billion that the Federal Reserve loaned to the U.S. government during the signing of that bill that created the Federal Reserve. But it can be completely unwound, and Trump could simply say, we're writing off the debt.
He needs to, because
by design, it's impossible to pay it off. I mean, the last American president who actually paid off all the national debt was Andrew Jackson, and how he did it was by shutting down the second bank of the United States.
And I mean, you even said something. Most of the debt is from interest.
Yes.
That is the problem. This is the same...
The 11th marble.
Rothschild, the same Rothschild banking system that existed during Napoleonic times.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take a phone call from Roger in Minnesota. Aloha, Roger. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I was inquiring about the right to drive without being penalized for not having a license.
Could you repeat that? We have a noisy phone connection. I was having trouble hearing you.
My phone's broke, so it's on speakerphone. I was inquiring about the right to drive without being penalized, without having a license.
I think you're talking about the Swiss law that says that the refugees don't have to have a license to drive for like 1 year or something.
Oh, no. The right to travel impunity without punishment.
Okay, I really cannot understand you, so thank you for the phone call, and call back when you get your telephone fixed here. But I really could not understand you, and I'm sure it's a combination of the phone and the Skype and all the rest of this thing. Now, back to some news here. Out in Nevada, as you know, they are getting ready for the trial of those people arrested during the Bundy Ranch standoff with the Bureau of Land Management. And interestingly enough, the prosecutors have filed a motion in the case asking Nevada District Court Judge Gloria Navarro to allow the government to literally cover up any wrongdoing by the agents of the Bureau of Land Management. They want the judge to simply say that nobody can talk about what the BLM actually did that precipitated this standoff. Gee, don't suppose they have something to hide, do you? Now, I hope the good judge is going to turn this petition down, because the Constitution guarantees people an adequate defense. And if they are not allowed to question the legality of what was being done, they're in a lot of trouble, because the defendant's position is they were acting legally to defend themselves from an illegal action by a government of the United States, an agency of the United States government. This should not be allowed. This nation was founded as a nation of laws that apply to everybody, including employees of government agencies. Nobody is supposed to be above the law in our society. Now then, the Education Department has come out with a report and concluded that the $7 billion spent by the Obama administration had no impact on student achievement. They certainly learned to believe in human-caused global warming and to grudgingly eat very tasteless lunch. But other than that, they didn't have much student achievement. We still have universities teaching students on how to deal with microaggressions. How are these kids going to get jobs if that's their education? And if you can't deal with microaggressions, how are you going to survive in the real world? The real world is a very harsh place, especially for those jobs that are most desirable. Working in government, working in the media. It's a very hostile environment. Now then, speaking of hostile environment, as you know, there's a big hue and cry coming up from the pharmaceutical industrial complex over Donald Trump's creation of a vaccine safety commission and the appointment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. As its head. And Robert F. Kennedy is on record as highly critical of vaccines and the CDC itself. And Robert F. Kennedy is pointing out something we all need to keep in mind. The CDC is not an independent agency. It's not a government agency. It's actually a private corporation. It receives a lot of its funding from the vaccine makers. The CDC itself owns over 20 vaccine patents. And the CDC sells about $4.6 billion of their own vaccines every single year. The CDC cannot be relied on to objectively evaluate vaccine safety when they're making that much money off of those products. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about vaccines. And Robert F. Kennedy's out there on record. He's reminding everybody that the CDC is not an impartial, objective agency when it comes to the health of the human population. They own vaccine patents themselves. They sell vaccines themselves, $4+ billion every year. With that much money on the line, of course, they're not going to be objective. And don't forget, there was that CDC scientist who was one of the authors of the CDC's report that claimed there was no link between vaccines and autism, and he blew the whistle and said the report was a complete fraud. Now, when I was a kid, I got, I think, two vaccines, polio and smallpox. That was it. Children today are getting 69, and autism rates are just skyrocketing. Something like 1 in 54 now, and it's predicted by 2030, half of all children, if nothing changes, by 2030, half of all children will be diagnosed as autistic. That means half the human population will be unavailable to the workforce. Plus, a large portion of the available workforce will be tied up caring for these autistic individuals. It's a systemic threat. Now, Donald Trump is obviously not a vaccine supporter. Apparently, in an interview with Opie and Anthony on Sirius, before he even declared to run for president, Trump said he'd never had a flu shot in his life and had never had the flu. Now, we've been talking about the documentary Vaxxed, and it shot into the independent media headlines when it was scheduled to be shown at the Tribeca Film Festival. And by the way, I notice on the cover of the front here where they have all the official selection of the various festivals. They didn't delete them, they just crossed them out. Because Robert De Niro, who has an autistic child, was a supporter of this film. And he's one of the founders of the Tribeca Film Festival. So he said, sure, we can show it here. And tremendous pressure was brought to bear. Some of the financial backers of Tribeca are tied up with the pharmaceutical industry and said, we will pull our support if you show this. And De Niro caved. And then he admitted he felt bad about it, but he still caved. And then a couple of other film festivals, same thing. Scheduled to be shown. It's an important documentary. And it gets yanked. And it has just now happened again. Apparently over in a there was a movie theater in London. The Curzon Cinema in Soho was supposed to be showing Vaxxed, and they came under pressure, and they've now canceled the screening. It makes it very, very obvious that the promoters and sellers of vaccine have got something to hide, and they are very, very scared. Now, TV and movies are going to tell you that doctors are always wonderful people, and they're always right. No, they're not. There are criminal doctors, like that one that they just threw in prison for 45 years for telling perfectly healthy people they had cancer so he could make money selling them chemotherapy and radiation. And medical science has a long history of goofs. So, anyway, let's see. Let's turn that down all the way. Let's take a phone call from Stephen in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey there, Mike. I'm a fairly new listener and a pretty big fan. I just wanted to, not to be the bearer of bad news, but I wouldn't expect much of a fair trial for those boys down in Nevada. I'm very close to some of the guys that are in jail right now, and I know for a fact that the prosecutor and the judge on that case are golfing buddies.
Well, you're right. They could be toast. And the thing is, we know that that whole push by the BLM was illegal anyway. The U.S. government is in many ways starting to behave like the Israeli government. We're going to go take land away from the rightful owners, and we'll turn it over to our buddies to build a shopping mall on or something. And we need to remember that in the Constitution, there is a strict prohibition on how much land the federal government is allowed to own. It's called the Enclave Clause. And the federal government is only allowed to own the land underneath federal buildings and federal infrastructure like military bases, harbors, and airports. And that's it. They're not allowed to own any other land because the Founding Fathers had known that when governments get into trouble, the first thing they try and do is pillage and loot their own people to get out of it. In the when Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility, and all of a sudden the United States creditors were demanding collateral because they no longer believed the gold was there, that's why Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency. Had nothing to do with the environment and everything to do with grabbing huge chunks of the American people's common heritage and locking it away from us. And they had all these different programs like heritage rivers and wilderness areas and wetlands and roadless zones and all the rest of it to conceal the true scale of the federal land grab, which is now somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of all the land in America is now being controlled by the federal government, much of it being pledged as collateral on the national debt, and the rest of it just being bounced around a little bit and eventually turned over to developers. And that's what was happening at the Bundy Ranch, and that was what was happening up there in that standoff at the Wilderness Center on that land that Hillary Clinton helped lease to the Russian uranium company. And it's more indications of a government that's hanging on the edge and just willing to do anything to perpetuate its power and existence a little bit longer. But it does sound to me like this is going to be a kangaroo court. And I feel bad for those guys, but they're in the right, in my opinion. But this, I think, comes under the heading of the long train of abuses and usurpations. So we add it to the list. Okay?
100% agree. Hey, free Eric Parker, free the Bundys, free the Hammonds, free Steve Stewart. Thanks a lot, Mike. You're doing great work.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, in response to my comment to the previous caller that we need to be fair, that there is a healthy gun culture in Washington State and Oregon, somebody just sent me in this flashback where apparently Spokane Valley, Washington has declared itself a sanctuary city for the Second Amendment. In other words, if you want to be a gun enthusiast, you can live in Spokane Valley and they will not cooperate with federal gun grab laws. So maybe the sanctuary city does have a legitimate purpose in preservation of our Constitution, but certainly not in defiance of it. Okay, now then, speaking of vaccine and a possible misuse of the word, there is work coming out from a bunch of psychiatrists that it may be possible to immunize children against fake news on climate change with a psychological vaccine. Now, of course, what they mean by fake news on climate change is all those people saying, gee, look at all that snow and ice. Back in 2000, they were saying snowfalls are a thing of the past. Look at all the snow and ice. Oh, that's fake news. Can't talk about the snow and ice. Can only talk about the pretty colored charts coming out of NOAA and NASA. And so their suggestion literally is that the propaganda should be delivered with what they call a warning dose of misinformation. In other words, try and keep them confused by having lies and truth blended together. Well, propagandists have known how to do that for a long time. But I'm sure that somebody will get a grant out of this and funding to continue the research on how to get Americans back to just believing blindly whatever corporate media and the government tells to them. But this whole thing about a vaccine, about fake news on climate change, reminds me of a quote from Paul Watson, who was a co-founder of Greenpeace, and now he's left them and he's off chasing whaling ships around the ocean. And he once said, it doesn't matter what's true. It only matters what people believe is true. I think he's been paraphrasing Stalin on that one. Meanwhile, out here in the world, the real world, rather, Japan is being buried in snow this winter. Complete shutdown, over 9 feet of snow in many areas. And highways are cut, millions of people are stranded, massive power outages. And the Hokkaido ski resorts have had to close because there's too much snow and there's a danger of avalanche. Now, over at Mammoth Mountain, California, which is a very nice ski resort, I've skied there myself, they're delirious. They have received a record-breaking 20.5 feet of snow this January. It's more than any other month in all of recorded history at Mammoth Mountain, and the month isn't over yet. They have got so much snow, they're predicting they're going to be able to stay open until next July 4th. Huge amounts of snow. Now, over in Great Britain, they had a very wonderful meteorological phenomenon. It's very rare to see this. And it is a type of clouds called nacreous clouds. And they look very pearlescent. They're pastel. They look like the inner surface of an oyster shell. But in order to form those clouds, the upper stratosphere has to be at minus 78 degrees centigrade. That is cold. That is very, very cold. And somewhere in the wilderness, Al Gore is crying. Donald Trump is planning to slash the EPA's budget by $1 billion. That's about 1/8 of its funding. And I think Donald Trump is concerned with all of these U.S. government agencies who have been misused and abused in promoting this global warming hoax. Because it's not only burning up tax money for what is essentially a private agenda by Al Gore and his investors, but it's also further damaging the credibility of the U.S. government. When all these U.S. government agencies like NASA and NOAA are coming on out with all these claims about how the world is broiling and it's all the fault of human activity and you've got to pay a carbon tax, and then we look out our own windows and we see the snow and ice. Then you have public relations disasters when NOAA is forced to admit that the satellite they put up to measure global temperature has been sending in bad data, 10 degrees too hot. And NOAA didn't realize it because they weren't actually checking ground sensors at the same locations the satellites were saying at those temperatures. It took outside people who were checking their own thermometers and then calling into NOAA saying, your temperature report for this area is wrong. It's too high by 10 degrees. And NOAA was finally forced to delete all of that data from their servers, and yet the global warming carbon Nazis still cite that data as proof of human-caused global warming. Anybody who says there's no such thing as a giant conspiracy to defraud the general population, we've got one right here, staked out naked on the ground for you to study and learn from. Now then, getting into the worlds of computer and computer crimes here, we've all heard the phrase credit card skimmer. This is a device that is placed over the card slot on a bank ATM machine, and they're made to look like they are part of the ATM machine. And some of the ATM manufacturers are now coming out with these very convoluted slot finials that make it hard to put a skimmer on there. And the criminals have responded by coming up with what is called a shimmer. And this is a credit card data reader that is so thin they can stick it inside the slot, and there's still enough room for your ATM card or credit card to go in. And you'll make the purchase, you'll type in your PIN number, you'll get your card back, you'll go home happy, and the shimmer now has your bank card data and your PIN number. I think we ought to go back to cash and carry. But of course the banks have another idea. They want a cashless society. They want everybody using plastic cards. So everybody is lined up as a potential victim for these cyber criminals. And remember, the banks and credit card companies recently changed the rules. In the early days, trying to get you idea that the plastic was an acceptable replacement for cash, if you were the victim of a fraud, the banks and credit card companies would cover it. No more. If you are defrauded through your bank or ATM or credit card, you pick up that loss. And now they want to force everybody to use these plastic cards. It's good for the banks. It prevents a run on the bank when things really get ugly. But you're being set up to be a victim, to be a regularly shorn sheep by the criminal class. Now, the security industrial complex is still out there making their money. New York is now calling for facial recognition cameras at the entrances to all bridges and tunnels. Now, there are a couple of problems with that. First of all, facial recognition is not a robust, dependable technology. They put in a facial recognition system at Miami Airport a couple of years ago, and they detained something like 900 people, all of whom turned out to be false positives. And all you have to do is put a little makeup on your face or wear a cap or sunglasses, and you defeat it. And what computer system is going to be powerful enough to go through all the pictures of all the people living in that part of the country in the time it takes for a car to drive from the beginning of the bridge or tunnel to its exit? It's not a workable idea. It's just it's another boondoggle. It's something they're doing to make it look like they're worried about you and spend your money. Now, Amazon's Alexa is starting to get a nasty, nasty reputation, and it's being sold as a personal assistant. But what it really does is listen for anything that you're saying and pop up with a commercial offer. If you're talking about water, it says, oh, we can order you a case of Fiji water, something like that. One of the biggest problems they have with it is families who have somebody named Alexa or Alexis or simply Alex. The device will think it's being talked to, and it's causing all kinds of confusion. And it's even picking up characters with the name Alexa, Alexis, Alex off of TV shows. and placing orders with Amazon for products that are not wanted. It's turned out to be a disaster. Didn't they, like, actually test this thing? Didn't they actually put it in some real homes and see what was going to result? That's what I would like to know. Now, the good news is it looks like Congress is backing off from the push to grant the FBI more warrantless surveillance powers. That's a good thing. We do have this Fourth Amendment, and we all got to go back to playing by the rules. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And, boy, I must have said something that really angered somebody because they're pounding on my server. We must allow the children to express their tantrums. I guess I should give them some Play-Doh and a safe room and a puppy to cuddle. Poor little traumatized, whoever they are. Now then, let's see. We already did the one about warrantless spying. And again, a government that does not fully comply with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is neither legal nor legitimate. And we are not obligated to obey an illegal, illegitimate government. We are not obligated to pay its out-of-control spending. And we're certainly not obligated to sacrifice life and limb of our children in an illegal, illegitimate government's wars of aggression. I'm kind of inflexible on this. Alrighty, now then, you probably remember in the last weeks of the Obama administration, he had his clemency pen out there. He was showing executive clemency, and he was, you know, freeing all of these drug criminals. And that is coming back to haunt him because apparently one of the crack dealers who was allowed out of prison early as part of the Obama administration's mass release of federal inmates has now been indicted for fatally stabbing his ex-girlfriend and her 2 kids to death in Columbus, Ohio. Obama has let hundreds of drug criminals go free, but Leonard Peltier and Mumia Abu Jamal are still rotting in prison for crimes they probably didn't actually commit. All right. Let's see. If you are a fan of starchy foods and you've been buying this low-carb thing, and it turns out, and to nobody's surprise, that like with any highly polarized diet, it's really not good for you. Some starch is needed for proper health. And diet should be balanced. We evolved as omnivores. And any diet that says you're only going to eat this thing is actually going to harm part of your system. Now, somebody just actually emailed in a quick comment about abortion because I was being taken to task by a woman saying, well, until that baby leaves your body, it's part of the woman's body and it's up to her what to do with it. And this person wrote in and says, I'll bet if you do a DNA test on the fetus and on the mother, you'll find they are not, in fact, the same thing. Good point. We need to keep that one written down for the fanatics out there. Glyphosate, along with deteriorating your GI tract, has now been discovered to cause liver disease. And you're not going to hear that one on the corporate media. It really is very terrifying to live in a society in which the government is so corrupt that they allow corporations to sell you dangerous products because it makes money. And as long as it makes money, that's all that really matters. We're going to take a break for station identification. Back with the lovely Lady Claire in just a minute. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And for those of you watching on BAM User, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to sit in on our third hour every Friday with her unique perspective on the world. And Claire, what is the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, the first thing I want to talk about is our state representative, Tulsi Gabbard.
Actually, she's our federal representative.
Federal, yes.
She's
okay.
from our state,
yes.
but she...
Okay. State representative in Congress, I should have said.
Yes.
She had the bravery and the courage, and I think we all need to commend her. And this goes beyond party lines, folks, so much.
Yes.
She had the courage to expose the truth on CNN after a secret visit, a fact-finding visit to Syria. And she said there are no moderate rebels in Syria. And she made some very caustic statements about the U.S. role in Syria in a CNN interview.
Why, the next thing she's going to tell us is that Saddam really didn't have nuclear weapons.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And she said, and I so applaud her for this, I wanted to see if there was in some small way a way that I could express the love and aloha and the care that the American people have for the people of Syria and see firsthand what was happening there, to see what the situation was. She told CNN's Jake Tapper on Wednesday. Her message to the American people was clear and extremely damning. It's an indictment of the steady stream of propaganda the Western media has fed the public regarding the existence of moderate rebels during the Assad regime change operation. And what she said, and I'm quoting her, "I'll tell you what I heard from the Syrian people that I met with, Jake, walking down the street in Aleppo and Damascus and hearing from them. They expressed happiness and joy at seeing an American walking through their streets. But they also asked why the U.S. and its allies are providing support and arms to terrorist groups like al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, or al-Sham, who are on the ground there raping, kidnapping, and torturing the Syrian people. They asked me, why is the U.S. and its allies supporting these terrorist groups who are destroying Syria when it was al-Qaeda who attacked the United States on 9/11? Well, I didn't have an answer for them, Gabbard noticed, noting the clear dismay the average Syrian has for the U.S. support of al-Qaeda, a proposition which every American should equally question. And I'm asking Mike's Rivero Rangers to do something. Her office number is a matter of public record. Would you please call in and support her? I don't care, Democrat, Republican, I don't care. The issue of peace crosses party lines and must. So please call her office and tell her that you support what she found. And any person in Congress who is supporting peace right now is someone who should be lauded, someone who should be commended, and let know that we support you no matter which political side of the aisle you sit on. You supported peace and you told the truth, and God bless you, you know.
And it's very important to do that because Tulsi is no doubt being flooded with phone calls and faxes and emails with a different point of view and a different perspective. And I want to share a little insight about the public relations industry many of you may not realize. There are public relations companies that specialize in manufacturing what appear to be grassroots postal letters. They have offices with all these little boxes all over the walls, and each box has a different kind of paper and different envelopes, and they'll have flowers or kittens or things. And their printers are set up with fonts that look like type from various typewriters or varying computers, so they can, for a fee, generate a stack of 1,000 letters, all of which look like they're written by a separate individual. They have software that will paraphrase the basic talking points, and then they will have runners basically take these envelopes out and drop them off at mailboxes all over the district of the representative. And this is big business in the PR world because the representative will come into their office, they'll see a huge stack of mail on their desk, and they've got no way of knowing that it all came out of a single origin. Right. So the only way we can counter that is by just showing Tulsi our support for what she did and what she's doing, and also counter this kill the messenger mindset that we're seeing in the corporate media, where they're already on the attack against her, and also Dennis Kucinich. I had no less than 4 pieces of email today denouncing Tulsi for wasting Hawaii taxpayers' money on this fact-finding trip. Well, Tulsi didn't waste taxpayer money. This was privately funded. We don't know who funded it, but she did not spend taxpayer money. But even if she had, she serves on the House Armed Services Committee, and that makes a fact-finding trip to any of the U.S. war zones a legitimate exercise of government oversight.
Completely legitimate, Michael. And I would say that the American people need to hear the truth, and that truth tellers should be praised and congratulated for what they do.
Absolutely. And this is such a sharp lady. I've been aware of her even before this trip. And I'll tell you something that really horrifies me about the Democratic National Committee. We were hearing earlier in the week, they're already talking about 2020, and they're putting together the list of who they're going to run in 2020 against Donald Trump. I'm going to do a quick shout-out here to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're hearing that on that Democratic National Committee list, Elizabeth Warren's at the top, although it's starting to look like she might not survive her next Senate run. And they're even talking about bringing back Hillary Clinton.
Ouch.
They're talking about Michelle Obama, who has never held public office or even really had a job.
Yeah.
Her one claim to fame is the school lunch program. They're talking about Joe Biden, and what is absent from that list is Tulsi Gabbard, who, if you look at the public relations disaster the Democrats have created for themselves this last year, Tulsi Gabbard right now is about the only Democrat one can look at with a high degree of respect. And I was very saddened that Donald Trump didn't find a place for her in his administration. I thought she would have been an excellent Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And for the Democrats to, at this point, not even being considering her for 2020 just shows you how out of touch they really, really are. But this is a lady where, again, this is way beyond party politics. This is somebody who's doing a great job, and certainly Claire and I are supporting her and will continue to support her. And it doesn't matter what parties we are all part of. She's out there doing the job that needs to be done. She's clearly her own woman. She's not going along with the status quo establishment view in Washington, D.C. Not just about Syria, but about other issues that she's come forward on.
Yeah, I support her greatly. Quick question, Mike. Did you talk in your first 2 hours about the number of fraudulent dead and registered voters in 2016?
I certainly did, but let's go ahead and talk about it again.
Okay. A study revealing that over 800,000 non-citizens voted for Hillary Clinton, but it doesn't account for dead and fraudulent voters, which accounted for 25 million registered voters during the 2012 presidential election.
25 million. That is a lot. And again, like I said in that first hour, 6 months ago it's impossible to rig our elections.
Right.
And then 3 months ago it's Russia was rigging our elections. And today it's don't you dare look at how our elections were rigged.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, you can't take all of those positions at the same time. That's the problem.
They're switching back and forth so much they're going to break their own necks.
Right.
Whoa.
Yes. I'd like to also talk about fake news of interests and intervention. And the U.S. and other media are continuing a strong move toward baseless, a.k.a. fake news. They recently caught the New York Times claiming that Russia had started the war in Georgia, something that the New York Times had earlier debunked itself. The Washington Post claimed that Russian hackers were sneaking into the U.S. electricity grid. This story fell apart within a few hours. Nothing in it was true. Hundreds of pieces were written about peaceful demonstrator rebels in Syria, about 250,000 civilians besieged in Aleppo, or Syrian government bombings of hospitals that lacked any base in reality. This is why the independent media is so important right now. And Mike, I think you are absolutely correct in your assessment that 2017 is going to be the year of the independent media. But that also means we've got to be extremely careful.
Yes.
And check our sources so that we are completely responsible.
We have to be more professional than the professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then talking about the Federal Reserve. Apparently back in 2011, when unemployment was at a terrible crisis level, and the jobless rate was allegedly around 9%, it was far worse than that. And apparently Federal Reserve bankers were mocking unemployed Americans. And House Democrats were aghast. With almost 5 unemployed Americans for every job opening, too many people remain jobless because of a lack of work, not a lack of wanting to work. And so in early 2011, they introduced a bill to reauthorize federal unemployment insurance benefits, a program to aid those who were looking for work. But behind closed doors at the Federal Reserve, there was a very different conversation. The Federal Reserve's mandate is to promote maximum employment, which essentially means print enough money so that everyone who wants a job has a job. Yet, according to the transcripts released this month, after the traditional 5-year waiting period, the Federal Reserve officials in November of 2011 were debating whether unemployment was caused by bad work ethics and drug use rather than the greatest financial crisis in 80 years. Michael, you can't make this stuff up.
Well, the problem is that you can't put what's going on just one source. I mean, the economy is a very complex system.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say we're going to have enough money to give everybody jobs, but you need to have businesses that those jobs are centered on. And one of the disasters that came on out of the crash of 2008 was the collapse of small businesses, family-owned businesses, which was exacerbated by corporate America's desire to basically consolidate and get rid of the small businesses that they viewed as a threat to their own profitability.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of small mom-and-pop shops go out of business as the big box stores would come into their communities. And the small businesses, prior to the 2008 meltdown, small businesses were responsible for the 65% of new job creation. And without those small businesses out there, you can sit there and say, well, we just need more money, we need a better work ethic, we need jobs. Where are the jobs going to be if not stimulating business somehow, somewhere? Now, there is absolutely no question that the out-of-control debt is crippling our economy. And there is no question that as long as we continue to believe that private central banking should be at the heart of our economy, we'll never be free of that debt, because private central banks are designed to always produce more debt than money with which to pay that debt. And that holds the nation and its people as debt slaves. It transfers the real hard assets of the nation and the people into the pockets of the bankers. And it's very predatory. And it's not a legitimate way to run this country. And when the United States was started, most people don't know that the American Revolution was fought about breaking free from a private central bank and having a nation with an honest monetary system. And that is no longer taught in our schools ever since the Federal Reserve was created, because we are back in that exact same predatory economic system. When this nation was started, the government created its own money, and it spent it into circulation to buy what the government needed. That money flowed through commerce without accruing any interest, and then was taxed back in the same exact amount to close the cycle and balance the books. And it is a system that works for the nation and for its people. And the private central bankers hate that. The private central bankers want a world in which everybody conducts commerce using banknotes borrowed at interest from them. The Rothschild family wealth is more than 5 times the combined wealth of the world's 8 richest billionaires, and they made it just by convincing us all that we have to use their ink and paper to carry out commerce, and that we have to borrow that ink and paper at interest from their banks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to all of those listeners and readers out there, please do your best to get your credit card bills paid down, because every time there is a basis hike at the Fed, that's going to increase your interest on your credit card most likely. And try to stay out of debt the best you possibly can.
Same thing with your variable rate mortgages.
Yeah.
And we are already hearing that as part of this friction between Yellen and Donald Trump, the Federal Reserve is going to start raising rates in order to hamstring Donald Trump's attempts to change the economy. And guess who will ultimately pay for all of that? It will be you, the American people.
Yep, absolutely. I know that you talked about this earlier in the show, but I'd like to revisit what's been going on in Chicago. Apparently, 6 people got shot during a memorial for a gunshot victim on Wednesday. And
isn't gun control great?
Yeah, you know. And a group of people had gathered at a local restaurant to grieve the death of Jemiah Fields' 20-year-old kid. I mean, just getting into the prime of his life. The gang found out that one of their targets was at the restaurant and over social media, according to community activist Jedida Brown. The gang came to the location and opened fire, wounding 6 people. Fields' mother was also wounded during the altercation. And I know that Trump has been talking about sending in the feds. But President Trump, I have a slightly different approach. Number one, look at what Portugal did with its drug policy, which was to decriminalize small uses of drugs, but send people for counseling. And what the statistics have borne out, Michael,
yes,
is that fewer people are getting involved with drugs, and very few people who are very young are getting involved with drugs.
Well, it's a very simple mechanism.
Yeah.
If drugs are a big-ticket, expensive item,
yep.
And we know the CIA's been up to their neck in all of this stuff going back at least to Vietnam days, then there is a financial incentive for the dealer to go on out, make friends with kids around the schoolyard, and give them a free sample to get them started. Now, if drugs don't pay very well, if people can get legal drugs like they can in, well, so many countries in Europe.
Portugal. Yeah.
Well, not just Portugal, but I think they did the same thing up in Holland. I know that drugs are decriminalized, or at least when I was down in Australia, they were pretty much decriminalized. If you can walk into a pharmacy and buy stuff there inexpensively, there's no point for an illegal criminal dealer to be approaching your children in the schoolyard and trying to get them hooked on something because it's available in the stores. But our war on drugs is a disaster, just as prohibition was a disaster. And if we look at the history of prohibition, we come to understand that prohibition was not about ending drinking in America, but turning alcohol into a highly profitable enterprise for those willing to engage in the gray side of the law, like old Joe Kennedy. And the same thing with the drug laws here in the United States. The drugs are kept illegal to keep them expensive and maximize the profits. And the war on drugs is actually the war on the competition's drugs. And that's
the CIA's.
And that's why the U.S. government was arming the Sinaloa cartel with military weapons in order to, you know, kill off the competition, because competition is a threat to profitability.
And the other thing that has to happen is families have got to be protected. Families have got to heal. Because when you've got a healthy family, healthy family and multi-generational many times, you don't have that pull where the gang becomes the kid's family. But moms and dads are going to have to step up to the plate, especially in urban areas, and be moms and dads and know what's going on with their kids. Well, that's really important.
I have a question for Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Back in 2013, it was common knowledge that the Mexican drug cartels had taken over the drug business in Chicago. And it's $30 billion a year. Why didn't you do something about that, Mayor? In fact, why did you disarm all of the people of Chicago, the law-abiding people? Are you working with the drug dealers to create a zone in which the criminals can prey on the helpless with impunity? Are you guaranteeing workplace safety for those who work for the drug cartels?
I think these are very valid questions that need to be asked.
I absolutely agree. Again, when you disarm law-abiding citizens, crime will flourish. Chicago's the perfect example of that. Washington, D.C. is the perfect example of that. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, what's the next thing you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to give an add a person collectively to the state of New Jersey, which tends to get dissed a lot. But New Jersey just became the first U.S. state to give new parents a baby box. Now, this is something that's been common in Scandinavia and Finland. And it contains newborn essentials and can serve as infant beds. And now new parents in New Jersey have access to the same resources. And experts believe that it will help prevent some infant deaths, just like it has in Finland. And the Baby Box Company partnered with New Jersey's Child Fatality and Near Fatality Review Board. And what this is, it's a box filled with diapers, clothes, baby wipes, breast pads, and more. And the box also contains a mattress that allows it to serve as the baby's first bed. So starting Thursday, new and expectant parents can register online at Baby Box University to receive their free box. The process requires that recipients complete the New Jersey syllabus, which is a series of videos from health professionals that educate parents on newborn care. I hope the program does work well to get new parents more information than they had, and I think it was a very intelligent thing for the state of New Jersey to have done.
Well, I would tend to agree with one caveat, which is, do these videos remind parents that they must vaccinate their children? Because this could actually be a very clever advertising campaign.
You are right on that.
Yeah,
you are
and no matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I'd like to go over to a comment made by Steve Bannon,
yes,
a gentleman who very much has President Trump's ear. And he has said, the media should be embarrassed and humiliated and keep its mouth shut for a while.
And the media came back and said, heck no.
No, no.
We have no shame.
Yeah, apparently. And Bannon is not shutting up about this. And on Thursday, and he typically doesn't talk to the press or answer his cell phone, said that the media needs to do nothing right about now. And it needs to listen for a while, he told a reporter during a phone interview. He repeatedly called the media the opposition party and said that they still don't understand this country. And, Mike, I think the guy is really, really right.
I think he is right.
Yeah.
And I think there's certainly a great deal of arrogance in the corporate media, and there's nothing new about that. I mean, even all the way back, decades ago, the heads of the network news felt that they were basically in control of the nation because that was actually their job as part of Operation Mockingbird,
right,
was to basically brainwash the American people to go along with what the establishment wanted. And they don't want to surrender that position. It's very lucrative. They get a rush thinking that all these millions of Americans are dancing to their tune. As I've mentioned before, they're trapped by their own business model. These prostitutes and correspondents in the corporate media are paid these gigantic salaries to be very convincing liars. And as a result, they can't start reporting the truth without their financial backers putting away the checkbook. And so they're kind of trapped there. They can't change their spots, and it's very obvious right up to the present day they can't change, and they don't want to change. And they are going to self-destruct. Bannon's advice is dead on. If the corporate media really wants to survive, they need to sit down, shut the heck up, and take a good look around, because the fundamental nature of information flow in society has been dramatically changed. And either you will evolve to adapt to that new information environment, or you will go extinct. And right now, the corporate media seems to be on the endangered species list.
Yes.
I certainly will not mourn them. I'm not going to even start a charity. Save the corporate media. Send your money today.
I don't think so.
We will send them a baby box.
No. Definitely not. I'd like to bop on over to an article from Sputnik News.
Okay.
And it has to do with what Russia is doing with Syria in terms of the peace talks and trying to create a political solution and a solution for political stability. Power splitting and minority rights are among the cornerstones of Russian proposed Syrian constitution.
We're going to have to take a break here. We'll get back to Russia and Syria after these few words.
Yep.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Lady Claire, you were talking about Russia's getting together with Syria and Turkey and possibly a representative of the Trump administration to kind of try and work out finally a Syrian peace deal that makes everybody happy.
Yeah. And apparently this was leaked to Sputnik. The issues of territorial integrity, separation of political powers, as well as respect for minorities' rights and international treaties are among the center concepts of this Russian proposed constitution for Syria. The paper was distributed by the Russian side among the delegates of the Syrian peace negotiations, which wrapped up earlier this week in Kazakhstan's capital, Astana. According to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Moscow has based its suggestions on what it heard from the Syrian government, the opposition, and from other countries of the region over the past couple of years. And it looks like they are really trying to create a viable, workable peace without necessarily having al-Assad being kicked out of power.
But see, there's the interesting development, because now Great Britain has backed off and said that they would be okay with Assad wanting to continue to run for presidency. Want to clear your throat now? I've got your volume down.
Okay.
All right. And we're back here.
And it states that the Syrian Republic is an independent, democratic, sovereign state based on the principles of people and supremacy of law and equality and social unity and respect of the rights and the liberties of all citizens without any differentiation.
Well, what they're doing is they're going down and they're saying all the politically correct things for international law and make everybody happy, and they're sending a signal to the United States government saying, if you will pull out of this, we'll pretend it wasn't this huge military defeat for you.
Yes, yeah.
That's what they're saying.
They're trying to let the U.S. go out gracefully.
Retire, yeah, they're trying to offer an exit strategy. Here's your red carpet, and just walk off into the sunset. And
according to antiwar.com, apparently the Pentagon's options for ISIS war is to center on, guess what, escalation. And President Trump...
There's a big difference, though, because the strikes into Syria since Trump took office are actually hitting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They're not hitting hospitals and pipelines and water processing plants. They're now actually cooperating with the Russians. And so those poor fools on the ground who were getting all the guns and ammo from the U.S., now they're getting by a more direct route, straight down from overhead. And
I see.
You know, holy war has now turned into holy crud.
Yes. However, there is talk of putting U.S. troops on the ground in Syria to fight directly, with one plan involving an entire battalion of U.S. troops being deployed around Raqqa. This is in keeping with when the Pentagon started offering plans to President Obama in 2009 regarding the Afghan occupation. We can see how well that's gone.
Yeah, that didn't work out too well.
With the plans exclusively centering on a huge new deployment set.
Well, I think Trump needs to take a good rethink on that and ask, I mean, we're already seeing all of these interventions turning into this generation's multiple copies of Vietnam.
Yeah.
And I think while Trump wants to come across as a firm, strong president, he's under no obligation to clean up the mess that was left by his predecessors. And if he wants to cooperate with the Russians to actually get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that's one thing. But certainly Russia and Syria are very troubled by this talk about safe zones, which may have actually been taken out of context, because apparently Trump's original comment was about trying to find some way to protect the civilians from the conflict, as opposed to enforcing some kind of bordered area militarily. The problem with that, of course, is that the U.S.-backed terrorist groups deliberately intermingle with the civilians. The civilians are not allowed to leave. And so that really is not going to be effective, and it's causing a little bit of friction with Russia.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, Trump is having to deal with transition. He's dealing with this media issues. But I think probably within the next few weeks, we'll say by end of February, we're going to see a change on Syria policy coming out of Trump as he finally gets around to thinking about what's really going on.
Yeah. I would like to hope that his approach is going to be moderate and conservative. And I think that if we actually had more focus in the U.S. on developing alternative sources of energy that worked to fuel a plane or a tank, we wouldn't be in the Middle East to begin with, Mike.
Well, you need to remember that the U.S. agenda to conquer the Middle Eastern oil nations is less about the oil itself and more about forcing that oil to be traded only with the U.S. dollar to keep up foreign demand and use of dollars, to keep interest payments flowing to the Federal Reserve. That is the penultimate reason for all of this.
Yeah.
The United States does have enough oil to fuel its own resources. We've got reserves. We've got Alaska. Fracking hasn't really worked out all that well. But the reason for conquering Iraq and all those other countries is not to bring that oil here, because Iraq's oil is still being sold where it used to be sold, but it's being sold for U.S. dollars.
Right.
And everybody wishing to buy Iraq oil has to come to the United States and either give us manufactured goods and agricultural produce for those pieces of ink and paper to buy their oil with, or they have to borrow them at interest from the Federal Reserve.
Yep.
That's really what's driving it. It's not the oil itself, it's the oil revenues. And that is really what's been driving this agenda.
Yeah, I hear you. There's an article that I saw that really concerned me in antiwar.com today, and it states rights advocates warn of backlash if Trump pursues torture. And I sure hope to heck that he is listening to Mattis, who says that torture is not creating actionable intelligence. And for a number of reasons. It shows that when the U.S. tortures or outsources torture, we have no humanity whatsoever.
And we open the door for the same methods to be used against our captured kids.
Yeah.
But we need to be very careful here, because everybody is responding, you know, Trump's torture and everything. And it turns out this may be another bit of fake news.
Ah, okay.
Because all of this originated just a few days ago with a story that came out of the New York Slimes and the Washington Compost, claiming they had a copy of a draft presidential order reauthorizing the CIA's black torture sites around the world. And that was reported in the New York Slimes and the Washington Compost, and articles like this responded to it without taking a moment to think, might this be another classic case of we're being fed a line by the corporate media? Because the White House has now come out and said this document, wherever it came from, it's not an internal Trump White House document. It appears to be somebody else's idea of a hoax to try and tarnish Donald Trump's image.
Another thing that I would like to hope that people close to Trump remember. It's a German interrogator from World War II, Hans-Joachim Gottlob Scharf. Joachim. He was called the master interrogator of the Luftwaffe, and possibly all of Nazi Germany. And he never used torture. He only used kindness. He would bring people out for day passes, for cultural events and fairs and theater, because he figured, and rightly so, that somewhere along the way, these English and British prisoners of war would say something that would throw a little bit more light on their mission. And after the war was over, this guy was so highly respected that the American military brought him over to teach his interrogation methods, because he was so humane and got the job done and no one got hurt.
Well, part of why his approach worked, and sadly it wouldn't be effective today, his approach worked because he knew that all of these soldiers who were invading Europe had been fed on all kinds of propaganda about what life was like in Nazi Germany, and so forth and so on. And so by just taking these people out of the POW camps and walking them around and letting them see with their own eyes that they had been lied to, it made it easier for them to say, well, wow, gee, I'm not really sure who's right or wrong anymore. And once you get past that point, yeah, they're going to start talking here. And I remember growing up in public school at the height of the Cold War and just being fed a line about just what naturally terrible people anybody from the Soviet Union was, to the point where the first time I actually met somebody from the Soviet Union, I mean, I went into this with trepidation. Is this guy going to rip my head off? And he turned out to be very nice and cultured and wonderful, and, you know, wow, it just really knew history. And I remember one time when I was working in Europe, and I got snowed in at the Frankfurt airport, and I wound up hanging out with a flight crew from an Aeroflot. And with the exception of one guy who I presume was the Zampolit, they were all wonderful people. The captain's son wanted to be a cosmonaut, and just because of ego, I had a bunch of my old NASA lapel pins stuck on the outside of my little carry case, and I just took them off and I said, here, your son can have these. And we got along really great. And remember what Kennedy said? We all walk on the same earth. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. And he was absolutely right about that. I think history has shown that we can all live together in peace. The only reason that we have wars is some individual or small group thinks that is going to increase their wealth and power. And their lust for that wealth and power is so great, they're willing to throw millions of people to their deaths just to live in a bigger palace, have a lot more zeros after their name, or just feel that they rule the world.
Absolutely.
Now, before you go to your next story, though, the other day I was talking about this scam that's going on around where you'll get a call from a telemarketer, and at some point they'll say, can you hear me? And the particular one I got the person said, I'm having trouble with my headset, can you hear me? And that they get the yes as a recording. And I hung up on this person because they wouldn't answer my call. And then I read about this being a scam because they're recording the phone call and they re-edit it to make it sound like you have committed to purchase some kind of a product or a service. And now I'm finding out Claire got the exact same scam phone call today. So be very much aware of this. First of all, in the age of the do not call list, you should hang up on telemarketers anyway. But if you get one and the first thing they're saying is, I'm having trouble with my headset, can you hear me? Hang up at that moment. Don't even say a word, because apparently this is just widespread all over the place. The police are warning people about it. The scammers are out in force. And I wish telephones were perfectly accurate in sound reproduction. My mother kept a boat air horn right next to the phone, and when she'd get a telemarketer call, she'd blast it into the headset, which would set off all the dogs in the neighborhood barking, and I would tell her, there's an audio limiter on the phone circuit. It doesn't come out the other side quite that loud. But I wish it could. You know, I'd like to be able to do like Zorg did in Fifth Element, push a button combination and have the phone at the other end explode.
I'd like to bop on over to Israel, which has just approved 153 more East Jerusalem settler homes. And the deputy mayor added that there has been a sharp increase in such projects since President Trump took office. Jerusalem Deputy Mayor Meir Tugeman told AFP that the approvals by the City Planning Committee were among those held up due to pressure from former U.S. President Barack Obama's administration. And Tugeman said developers could start building from tomorrow following Trump's inauguration. And Tugeman is speaking of plans for 11,000 homes in process for annexed East Jerusalem, which means that the Palestinians are just getting kicked out.
Well, have they formally annexed East Jerusalem, or they're just grabbing the land?
They're grabbing the land and annexing.
Okay, because there's two different processes.
Yeah.
One of the issues there is there's a lawsuit. We reported on this, I think it was either yesterday or Wednesday, where under the Hague regulations, an occupying power is allowed to temporarily confiscate land for military security purposes. But once the military purposes are over, they are required to return the land to its rightful owners. Now, what Israel has been doing in the West Bank is they'll come into an area where there's a bunch of Palestinians living, and they're saying, we're confiscating this land for military purposes. They kick out the Palestinians. Then they simply hand the land over to developers who will build an illegal settlement. And this lawsuit that is now making its way through the courts in Israel and hopefully to the international courts is saying once the military is not using this land anymore, it goes back to its original owners. Now, I'm not expecting a lot of justice from the courts of Israel, but if they could get this into some kind of international court or the United Nations, and frankly, I'm reacting to Donald Trump's defunding of the UN with mixed feelings. I feel the UN has been a failure because they can't bring Israel under control. And at some point, Israel is just proving to be the biggest threat to world peace because every time they start up a mess, America's kids are sent in to clean it up. And I think we're all getting kind of sick and tired of that. Now, I'm hopeful that Donald Trump, when he actually starts dealing with the government of Israel, is going to be disabused of his current image of Israel, which is based on what he has seen in TV and movies. And he's going to start realizing that just like the corporate media lied about his campaign, and is lying to this very second about his presidency, that they've been doing the same amount of lying on behalf of Israel, and his policies will change. But I'm afraid for the moment, Israel is going to take advantage of this change of administration, and they're going to steal more things that do not belong to them.
Yeah, I would like to hope that the bromance between Trump and Netanyahu is mercifully short-lived once President Trump does get a sense of what's happening in the Middle East to the Palestinian people.
Well, Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump's father were friends, but Netanyahu as a factor may be coming to an end because apparently this corruption investigation into him is now expanding, and it does look like there's a power block within Israel's government that thinks it's time to get rid of the extremist and maybe get a more moderate Israeli leader to calm things down and help to try and restore Israel's image in the world, which has just taken a hammering in response to the actions of Netanyahu.
Yeah, it's, people understand that they can't trust a thing that he says.
Well, that's almost a universal over here.
Yeah.
And again, we don't know what he's really saying because it's filtered to us through the corporate media. I mean, Haaretz has given quotes to Bibi Netanyahu that I find very shocking and angry, but they never appear here in the United States corporate media. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. Okay. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program on this Kaahumanu Friday. And a little bit of quick news from here in Hawaii. Mark Zuckerberg has apparently, because of the negative publicity, canceled his planned lawsuits against the residents of Kauai who own these little hereditary parcels on his 700-acre estate. And so he's dropped his plans to try and force them into court and hit them with so many legal bills they'd be forced to sell those last little bits of land to him. And now he's got to fight because he wanted to build this huge, tall wall which would block the view from Kamehameha Highway. And so Mark just seems to really be annoying everybody on that rock right now.
I think so. Would like to go over now to Venezuela. And the government's opposition, whatever that may be, has promised renewed street movement. The Venezuelan opposition leaders are calling for a renewed wave of street protests against the government of Maduro. The South American country's opposition coalition on Thursday rejected proposals from international facilitators to revive talks with the socialist administration. The opposition put a protest movement on hold and engaged in dialogue with a deeply unpopular government from October through December of last year. And the talks fell apart because the government was unwilling to make concessions. And it's only a question of where this is actually going to go. And I know that there are many in Washington salivating over the prospect of that government getting thrown out.
Well, they've been trying to get Venezuela under control going all the way back to Hugo Chavez because Venezuela has this habit of spending the tax money on the people, and they figure that's giving all the other taxpayers around the world really bad ideas. This idea that the government should take your money and actually do things for you with it. And, of course, the fact that Venezuela has been selling their oil for currencies other than the dollar. So I got to tell you, this current situation down there, it feels like another one of these Victorian New England Color Revolution Maidan specials in progress.
I wonder how much George Soros is supporting it.
He's probably in this thing neck deep. And no doubt short-selling everything he can, because that's how he's made his billions of dollars, is somehow knowing ahead of time when a disaster was going to befall some part of the world and profiting handsomely from it.
And a government, a government falling.
That does tend to rattle the stock markets and everything.
And as we discussed earlier, I have to wonder on what side the military of Venezuela is going to come down. Are they going to come down on the side of the people who are protesting or on the side of the government that's handing them a paycheck, maybe?
Well, we know from our experience in Kiev that most of the military will side with the paycheck. At least they did initially, less and less than so now because Kiev has run out of money. And everybody's unhappy with Poroshenko right now. Real quick story for the science before we end the show. Curiosity has found an iron meteorite on Mars, which is only the third time a meteorite has been detected on Mars. All right, there's the music. Time for Claire and I to get on out of here and get into weekend mode. It's Kaahumanu Friday, so we'll be back Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know, tell all your friends about Republic Broadcasting and WhatReallyHappened.com. Aloha, America.